research under Professor David Moore and mentor Cedar Wild. I am currently working on a project that I call the outgassing of electronegative impurities within materials using the nEXO Neutrinoless double beta decay detector. Some of my goals and rationale for this project is modeling some diffusion parameters of relevant atmospheric gases that outgas from certain materials that will be used in the nEXO detector, which I will get into a little more kind of slides. Some of these diffusion parameters are D naught and are a diffusion constant called D naught, and then activation energy and some other things that we're kind of interested in is uncovering other relevant species. So right now we think O2 is the most electronegative gas in our samples, but not be the case. And are there any other confounding variables and metrics that are making our fits to our data successful or unsuccessful? So here's a kind of general concept map that goes from the most general outline of what I'm doing to the specific things of what I'm doing. So the big question is kind of what we talked about in other Neutrinoless projects is why do we live in a matter-dominated universe? And one of the explanations of that is that there might be these things called Majorana particles. These particles mean that the neutrinos and the antineutrinos, matter and antimatter counterpart, are effectively the same, kind of creating that imbalance like we talked about in a couple of other presentations for why we have more matter than we see antimatter. And that leads us to observing Neutrinoless double beta decay, which we believe in is theorized to happen in some species where we have like single beta decay that happens in a lot of species. Some are more energetically favorable to have double beta decay. And this is very useful for looking for if neutrinos are Majorana particles, because if we have two neutrinos kind of coming out of the same event, and we don't observe the neutrino, hence Neutrinoless, we can then kind of assume that the antimatter or the antineutrino and the neutrino kind of annihilate each other. So that leads to the nEXO detector, which is a large-scale xenon detector that is yet to be built. It is the successor to the EXO 200 detector, and it will be underground, where we will place a vessel of lots of liquid xenon, and there will be an electric field within the chamber of liquid xenon, so that when xenon, the xenon that we're looking at, when it goes under decay, the electric field will kind of catch the electrons that come from the ionized xenon, and we will be able to measure this detection of very sensitive. And that kind of leads to xenon 136, which is what we're currently interested in. It has a half-life of over 10 to the 25 years, meaning that this detector has to be very sensitive. And in that being, we want to be able to preserve the electrons that come from the ionized xenon as much as possible, and we want to kind of limit any background that we find. And that background might be that some of the materials used in the detector absorb like atmospheric gases while they're just out in the world being produced or whatever. And when we put them in the detector over the time scale that we're looking at, which will be many years, they will slowly off-gas this gas that they've absorbed, kind of potentially interfering with our electron lifetime inside the chamber. So what I'm specifically doing is I'm taking this model of diffusion that was created before me, and I am measuring the diffusion of samples in an experimental setup we have downstairs, and doing some statistical fitting analysis to fit our model to the measurements that we take. And one of the main ways I'm doing this fitting is using a Monte Carlo chain, which kind of produces this probability distribution for all these different parameters we have, and is supposedly one of the best ways to look for these unknown parameters that we have that can be very degenerate. So right now I'm working with this theoretical model, which we've kind of broken up into two parts. This is the full model, which models the flow rate of particles out of the material. And we can approximate, this is a large expanded series, and we can approximate it down to things that operate within a short time scale. So certain materials that outgas in a shorter time scale, we can approximate it down to a function that looks like this with a root over t kind of form, or things that off-gas on a longer time scale. We can use more terms of the series, specifically the first term. And all these things are also highly temperature dependent. So not only am I kind of putting samples in a chamber and kind of measuring the off-gas, we're also increasing the temperature during each measurement, because we found that this D that is found in our models is highly temperature dependent, which will allow us to model our things better with the temperature data. So some of my code implementation, sorry, it's kind of small, but just kind of the main idea is that for a lot of my models, I was using the function that you showed before with the either the first series or the approximation. And when we get a successful fit, we will transform it back to basically get these two parameters that is what of interest of us. So D and I and EA, like I talked about before. So right now, here's some of my current data. These were successful fits from an undergraduate before me that was working on the project of a material called Vespel. Right now, we also want to look at materials like epoxy and Teflon, which I'm currently doing. However, with the epoxy, we found some weird anomalies in our measurements, and with Teflon, we've been not really able to fit it as nicely as we did with Vespel, not really giving us a lot of confidence on the D9 EA that we produced. So to kind of get into why maybe these fits not be working is what I've been doing for the majority of summer. So our data is not. Our data is not fit in model, so you can see like the red line is our model. It's supposed to be fit to parameters using the Monte Carlo chain and other fitting analysis too. So like a chi-square test or a minimized chi-square. We also use to fit, and we are not getting as nice a fit as we want to see. So one of the first thoughts we had was maybe there's potential background interference in our data. So not only is our to go back to explain what this graph is, it's basically when we put a sample inside the chamber, we take the pressure down and we have something called a residual gas analyzer that takes the partial pressure of the chamber at the increments of time that we give it. So basically we can see the pressure of the sample either increasing or decreasing within our chamber as we raise the temperature, which is at each of those humps. So what we were thinking was maybe as we're going down, we see this kind of steep drop off. Maybe there's some kind of background in our chamber that we're not accounting for. And I looked into that, and our background is a lot smaller than our data. So it's still a possibility, but I wanted to go on to more. I moved away to that to get into different things of why our data might not be fitting, just because with the background data we have, it's so much lower than when we have samples. So the background data here is when we have no sample in the chamber, and then the top line is when we do have a sample in chamber, and you see that big difference, kind of giving us confidence that there might not be the interference. So we're thinking maybe there's any confounding factors in our setup. So this is our setup. So we place the sample in here, which is the chamber, and then the RGA, the residual gas analyzer, is connected on top, and it's heated to certain steps that we program to our heater, and taken a measurement over anywhere between 48, and we've been working with longer time, so 48 hours or as long as we need with 3 different temperature steps. And one of the things we were thinking about was that in this part of the heater, there's a big chunk of metal where when we rate the temperature, the heater kind of has to traverse this metal to get back up to our sample, and our sample has thermocouples on top of it. So maybe there's this like big tapering of our temperature that we're not really accounting for. And we can kind of use like some common physics of like a resistor capacitor circuit where we see like this kind of tapering of time modeling this like 1 minus e to negative t over some RC or whatever. And we can kind of use this to assume that we can model this as well as our temperature, which I did here, which was giving our temperature that we record and convolving it, which is a like common signal analysis technique of taking the product of 2 functions, integrating it over the mirror of the function and integrating each step and kind of mashing them together, creating a 3rd function, where I'm able to give it a new parameter where we can kind of smear out the function. And then another thing that I'm looking into now is maybe we don't know if that our short approximation or a long approximation are adequate for the material I'm using. So, so with Teflon, this green line is our short approximation. And we would think with the way we understand short approximation works, we would assume that Teflon is in this approximation. But this approximation only accounts for the small part of the entire series, which is the red line. So we're thinking maybe it's in this kind of in-between range, and I am going on now to start analyzing the data with the entire series instead of using the approximation. That's it. Thank you.
Any questions? Yes.
So, I just had a minor question about whether or not, in the fit function definition, if the pi being taken to that like left versus using the fit package of like that produce a different result.
No, so yeah, so this is actually like in that last slide when I talked about implementing the entire series. This is like the newest iteration of having the entire series. So I have a for loop happening here where it just produces all the terms. And before we were using like the NumPy, but just because of the way I wrote this for loop, I wanted to kind of break these variables down to not have this messiness, and so I just added the pi and in the number form that it is, and effectively.
Further question? Yeah.
You said you had a residual gas analyzer.
Yes.
Is it all one type of gas that's outgassing, or is there a lot of different things? Or
So when we take the measurement, it takes the entire everything in the atmosphere. So we have H2O, we have O2, N2, some argon in there. And the way the RJ works is that like it takes the atomic mass and is able to separate and know what partial pressures of each of those gases are. So in our measurement code, we break it up into all the different gases. Right now, I'm specifically focusing on O2, but like I said in the in like one of the goals is like maybe I want to start looking at other gases that might be relevant to us because they should all follow the same model that we're using theoretically.
Questions? No.